Hello and welcome back to A Christmas Carol Annotate with me. We are now towards the end of stave 2, so this will be the last video on stave 2. You might want to pause this video now and go and grab your copy of A Christmas Carol, your highlighter and your pen, and you might also want to grab your printed copy of this revision booklet. If you haven't had a chance to print this off yet, then a link for this is in the description box below, so please feel free to print it off, and we will be adding quotations to it at the end of this video. So let's get started. His former self turned down the lamps as he gave utterance to the wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air. "My time grows short," observed the spirit. "Quick." So we know that the spirit has been taking Scrooge, showing him the memories of his past self. So when he was a little boy, when he was a little bit older, then when he was in his youth at his first place of work. We have now arrived at a different scene, and he's a bit older here, but the lesson he learns in this instance is probably the most impactful for him. This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect. For again Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. So this word avarice is a noun, and it means extreme greed for wealth or material gain. The fact that Scrooge's face is worn out due to his greed shows that not only the psychological damage of covetousness, so covetousness is another word for greed that we've spoken about earlier, but also the physical damage it has had on him, the fact that it's aged him, that you can see it on his face, how stressed he feels by greed. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eye, which showed the passion that had taken root, and where the shadow of the growing tree would fall. Here Dickens uses metaphorical language, and he likens Scrooge to a fallen tree, suggesting that Scrooge's growth as a person has been destroyed by his greedy nature. So he's a fallen tree. So he's been destroyed by the greed and the lust for money. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a mourning dress, in whose eyes there were tears which sparkled in the light that shone out of the ghost of Christmas past. "It matters little," she said softly, "to you very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in times to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve." So, Belle, Scrooge's girlfriend here, is talking about how an idol has replaced the love that Scrooge used to have for him. And this idol that she's speaking about, and she refers to later on as a golden one, is money. So this is another metaphor implying Scrooge worships money, and we know that she's talking about that you could say that she's suggesting that he worships money because of that metaphor of an idol. "What idol has displaced you?" he rejoined. "A golden one." "This is the even-handed dealing of the world," he said. "There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and there is nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth." So here Scrooge is saying that it's perfectly normal to love money. Nobody wants to be poor, everybody wants to be rich. And Belle says, "You fear the world too much," she answered gently. "All your other hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of its sordid reproach. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you. Have I not?" So throughout this passage, one of the things that we see is the semantic field of money used whenever Belle speaks about Scrooge's feelings. She's also speaking about here how she has watched Scrooge's good characteristics fall off one by one as he becomes more and more greedy and lustful for money. "What then?" he retorted. "Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I am not changed towards you." So Scrooge is suggesting here that he's just maturing as a person. He's not changed his love for her. Nothing's changed between them. She shook her head. "Am I? Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so, until, in good season, we could improve our worldly fortune by our patient industry. You are changed. When it was made, you were another man." So Belle is saying that he used to be a completely different person, and now she doesn't recognize him anymore. This quotation here, "we were both poor and content to be so." So they're happy, they were content, they were comfortable. Echoes the earlier conversation that Scrooge had with Fred when Scrooge said, "What right have you to be merry? You're poor enough." So we saw that quotation in stave 1. And this is a similar message that's being sent here, that money cannot buy happiness. "I was a boy," he said impatiently. "Your own feeling tells you that you were not what you are," she returned. I am. That which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly I have thought of this, I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it and can release you." So this quotation here where she says she will release him is ironic, because Belle tells Scrooge that she'll release him, implying that he is trapped in his relationship with her. But really it is she who is trapped in the misery that Scrooge's greed causes her. But in a moment she'll explain obviously why she uses or chooses that word release. "Have I ever sought release? In words? No, never." "In what then?" "In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end, in everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. If this had never been between us," said the girl, looking mildly but with steadiness upon him, "tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now?" "Ah, no." He seemed to yield to the justice of this supposition, in spite of himself, but he said with a struggle, "You think not?" "I will gladly think otherwise if I could," she answered. "Heaven knows, when I have learned truth like this, I know how strong and irresistible it must be. But if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can even I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl? You who in your very confidence with her weigh everything by gain, or choosing her, if for a moment you are false enough to your one guiding principle to do so, do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do, and I release you, with a full heart, for the love of him you once were." So Belle is saying here that she doesn't believe that he would have chosen her had he always been this greedy-natured. That he wouldn't choose somebody who doesn't value and love money the way he does. She's also suggesting that if she carries on in this relationship, then Scrooge will begin to feel resentful towards her for not loving money in the same way he does, for not thinking about profit and making money all the time. So that is why she uses that word, release you, and she repeats it again here. So it's suggesting entrapment for the both of them. Because if she continues to be in this relationship with Scrooge, then Scrooge will feel trapped by her, because they're not of a similar they don't have similar interests. They're not greedy like one another. And in a similar way, Belle will feel trapped by him because she doesn't recognize him anymore. She doesn't see him in the same way, and she doesn't love him in the same way. He was about to speak, but with her head turned from him, she resumed. "You may the memory of what is past half makes me hope you will have pain in this, a very, very brief time, and you will dismiss the recollection of it gladly, as an unprofitable dream, from which it happened well that you awoke. May you be happy in the life you have chosen. So she's saying that Scrooge will find pain in this separation, but only for a brief time, only for a short amount of time, but he'll quickly get over it when he realizes that it wasn't something that allowed him to make money, so it was unprofitable. So throughout this passage, again, like I said earlier, there is the semantic field of money used throughout it. Whenever Bell speaks about Scrooge and his feelings, every feeling he has is linked to money and capitalism. I would like you guys to go and research a bit about capitalism, but just really briefly, capitalism is a system that protects the most vulnerable and economically disadvantaged members of society. Somebody who is a capitalist is greedy, looks out for themselves, thinks only about how to make more money, but not how to be socially responsible. So how to help the more disadvantaged in the world. Okay. It is really important that you understand capitalism and socialism, especially if you are also studying an inspector calls for your modern prose section of the literature exam. She left him and they parted. Spirit, said Scrooge, show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me? This particular memory seems to be the most painful one for Scrooge. So we could argue to some extent that some of the memories that we've seen, especially of him being neglected as a child, the implication that he was also abused as a child, also when we find out that little Fan died and the heartbreak that he may have encountered through that, we could justify his callousness and his need to maybe busy himself with making money and with business as opposed to form close attachments or close relationships. However, with this particular scene, so whilst it could be argued that some of the other events that happened to Scrooge during his youth may justify his cold and self-isolated nature, his miserliness is no justification in this instance, as the lesson that losing Belle should have taught him is the value of family, love and relationships over money, especially seen as though he's having such a strong reaction to this particular memory. And we see this recurrent theme throughout this final section of the stave, when the ghost continues to show Scrooge Bell's life. He doesn't seem to have learnt anything. Instead, his love for money grew and he became lonely and cold because of this. One shadow more, exclaimed the ghost. No more, cried Scrooge. No more, I don't wish to see it. Show me no more. But the relentless ghost pinioned him in both his arms and forced him to observe what happened next. They were in another scene and place, a room not very large or handsome, but full of comfort. So we've got this room here described as something that's not large, that's not beautiful, but it was comfortable, okay? Near to the winter fire sat a beautiful young girl, so like that last that Scrooge believed it was the same, until he saw her, now a comely matron, sitting opposite her daughter. So this is a fast forward of the life of Belle now as she's older, so she's described as a matron and she's sitting opposite to her daughter. The noise in this room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children there than Scrooge in his agitated state of mind could count, and unlike the celebrated herd in the poem, they were not 40 children conducting themselves like one, but every child was conducting itself like 40. Throughout this passage that we are going to continue to read, Dickens is developing the importance of family. We have seen little Fan and her happy impact on Scrooge. Now Scrooge is being shown what he has missed with his greed by leaving or allowing Belle to leave him. The consequences were uproarious beyond belief, but no one seemed to care. On the contrary, the mother and daughter laughed heartily and enjoyed it very much, and the latter, soon beginning to mingle in the sports, got pillaged by the young brigands most ruthlessly. What would I not have given to be one of them? Though I never could have been so rude. No, no. So here, in this passage that we're going to be looking at, this reflection is presented as the narrator's thoughts, so Dickens's thoughts, but it seems to be more fitting of what Scrooge would be thinking. So Scrooge's thoughts are embedded in Dickens's narration here. Though I never could have been so rude. No, no. I wouldn't for the wealth of all the world have crushed that braided hair and torn it down, and for the precious little shoe I wouldn't have plucked it off. God bless my soul, to save my life. As to measuring her waist in sport, as they did, bold young brood, I couldn't have done it. I should have expected my arm to have grown round it for a punishment, and never come straight again. And yet I should have dearly liked, I own, to have touched her lips, to have questioned her, that she might have opened them, to have looked upon the lashes of her downcast eyes, and never raised a blush, to have let loose waves of hair, an inch of which would be a keepsake beyond price. In short, I should have liked, I do confess, to have had the lightest license of a child, and yet to have been man enough to know its value. So here he's saying, Dickens is saying, and I'm going to be really brief here, that he wished that he kept hold of Belle, and he would have liked to have a child at least with her, but he wasn't man enough to do that. But now a knocking at the door was heard, and such a rush immediately ensued that she, with laughing face and plundered dress, was borne towards it, the centre of a flushed and boisterous group, just in time to greet the father, who came home attended by a man laden with Christmas toys and presents. Then the shouting and the struggling and the onslaught that was made on the defenceless porter, the scaling him with chairs for ladders, to drive into his pockets, despoil him of brown paper parcels, hold on tight by his cravat, hug him round his neck, pommel his back and kick his legs in irrepressible affection, the shouts of wonder and delight with which the development of every package was received, the terrible announcement that the baby had been taken in the act of putting a doll's frying pan into his mouth, and was more than suspected of having swallowed a fictitious turkey glued on a wooden platter, the immense relief of finding this a false alarm, the joy and gratitude and ecstasy, they are all indescribable alike. It is enough that by degrees the children and their emotions got out of the parlour, and by one stair at a time up to the top of the house, where they went to bed, and so subsided. Again, the excitement, warmth, and exuberance of children are used to show us throughout this passage that Dickens values and hopes to make his. It shows us what Dickens values himself and hopes to make his readers value as well. And now Scrooge looked on more attentively than ever, when the master of the house, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother at his own fireside, and when he thought that such another creature, quite as graceful and as full of promise, might have called him father, and been a springtime in the haggard winter of his life, his sight grew very dim indeed. So Scrooge is looking at the father of these children, and how beautiful these children are, and thinking about how he could have had this life but he chose not to, and how instead of them warming a cold winter day, so here that Dickens is speaking about how children warm a cold winter day, he's left with a dim winter day. Belle, said the husband, turning to his wife with a smile, I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon. Who was it? Guess. How can I? Don't I know? She added in the same breath, laughing as he laughed. Mr. Scrooge. Mr. Scrooge it was. I passed his office window, and as it was not shut up, and he had a candle inside, I could scarcely help seeing him. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear, and there he sat alone. So this is quite a troubling insight into how Scrooge allowed Marley to die alone. So remember how the repetition of soul was used to talk about how Scrooge was Marley's everything, so only friend, only business partner, only thing in the world. So presumably Scrooge was his Marley's only thing as well. And the fact that Scrooge allowed Marley to die alone is extremely troubling. Quite alone in the world, I do believe. "Spirit," said Scrooge in a broken voice, "remove me from this place." So throughout this scene, there's violent outbursts of Scrooge, which are sudden and unexpected, and reveal how tortured he is by these memories. "I told you these were shadows of the things that have been," said the ghost, "that they are what they are. Do not blame me." "Remove me," Scrooge exclaimed. "I cannot bear it." He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face in which in some strange way there were fragments of all the faces it had shown him, wrestled with it. "Leave me! Take me back! Haunt me no longer!" In the struggle, if that can be called a struggle in which the ghost, with no visible resistance on its own part, was undisturbed by any effort of its adversary, Scrooge observed that its light was burning high and bright, and dimly connecting that with its influence over him. He seized the extinguisher cap and by a sudden action pressed it down upon its head. So we see here that the ghost's light was becoming brighter. So light was burning high and bright, and then its influence over him. So again, this light is symbolic of hope. So the hopeful changes in Scrooge that are about to come as a result of these lessons. The spirit dropped beneath it, so that the extinguisher covered its whole form, but though Scrooge pressed it down with all his force, he could not hide the light, which streamed from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bedroom. He gave the cap a parting squeeze, in which his hand relaxed, and had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. So we have now finished stave 2. I'll move over to the revision booklet now. So as you can see, we have already filled in quite a bit of the revision booklet. These are the quotations. I'll just zoom out of it a tiny bit. You might want to pause it here so that you can add these to your own revision booklet. So these are the quotations that we've collected from this particular part of stave 2. So Scrooge in love. His face had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. Another idol has displaced me, a golden one. So can you see that we've used ellipses here? You can use ellipses to shorten quotations as long as you are using the bits that are most important and ensuring that it still makes sense when you've used ellipses. So just to shorten the quotation. We were both poor and content to be so. Show me no more. Spirit, said Scrooge in a broken voice, remove me from this place. Remove me, Scrooge exclaimed. I cannot bear it. Leave me, take me back, haunt me no longer. So if you'd like to pause it here so that you can jot these down inside your own booklet. We've also got this little section here on 803 context. So Dickens shows the destruction of greed through his portrayal of the breakdown of Scrooge and Belle's relationship. When Dickens shows Belle's family, we again see the excitement, warmth and exuberance of children used to show us what Dickens values and hopes to make his readers value. So you might want to also pause this section here so that you can add the context part in your scroll section of the booklet as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. In the next video, we will begin on stave 3. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe if you have found these videos helpful, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.